What is India's strength? India's strength is the enormous diversity of the country, its culture and its people. India will be, within a generation, a urban majority country, which means we're going to see hundreds of millions of people moving into India's urban spaces. Now, when you're building a city, you're thinking in decades, maybe even centuries. Smart cities are about clustering smart people, smart institutions, and creating an economic model that can evolve with time.
When we are designing a city, what we are really doing is to design a way of life. What kind of life will make us happier? So the first thing before we do anything is to take some time to dream without restrictions what the ideal way of life in a city would be, what the ideal city would be.
It's about having smartness in every aspect of the city. It means a smart way of governing. It means smartness in the way institutions are managed. It means smartness in the way big pieces of infrastructure are set up and designed and maintained, and down to the smallest pieces of what seem to be low-tech innovations, but are smart nonetheless.
A smart city needs to be a system which grows in an intelligent way, is quite compact, it doesn't have sprawl in terms of economic development. Smart means something quite different. It means thinking that the way the city is going to grow is not going to waste resources in the future.
Smart city is a city that makes sure that all its citizens have a good quality of life. Also, it's a city where people are able to meet their aspirations. A smart city for a person in a low-income family is where their kids can go and access education, where they can go and access jobs. So I think the main sort of thing that a smart city needs to do is to be able to address quality of life.
I had been obsessed with urban issues for a long time, and to me transport was very peculiar. As society gets richer, there are more cars, more traffic jams, and to me it was evident that we could not solve this with rail systems. They're extremely expensive to build and extremely expensive to operate. And then later I discovered the Curitiba model, and it was like magic. I said, this is amazing, this is the solution. So we took the Curitiba model and we made some improvements which improved greatly its capacity. What gives capacity and low cost to a mass transit system is speed. And in order to have speed, you need that people board the bus extremely quickly. When a bus arrives at a station, you can get 60 people into the bus and 60 people out of the bus in seconds. We not only made infrastructure for pedestrians, but we made infrastructure for bicycles, and we built about 300 kilometers of protected bicycle ways. And it was a little crazy because almost nobody used bicycles at that time to go to work. But we also wanted to not only facilitate people using bicycles to go to work. For a low-income person, this may represent a savings of a month and a half wages, but also because it creates equality.
In this task of transforming our cities and making them livable and efficient, many people consider Ahmedabad to be at the forefront. One of the earliest projects that Ahmedabad did was a street improvement project. This was in the early 90s when Ahmedabad improved one street to show how streets could be designed well. And the inspiration for this came from street design projects in the United States. In the case of the BRTS, the inspiration was clearly from Latin American cities. So we had the mayor of Bogota come here to Ahmedabad to explain how he had built a bus rapid transport system. The other project that has done really well is the Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project. This is a multi-dimensional project that does many things simultaneously. It cleaned up a very messy, polluted river. It provided the city with a public realm all along the edge of the city. It provided housing for the people who got displaced by this project. Most importantly, it's a project that is self-financing. It uses no money from the taxpayer.
Good city making is about two big things. One is the effect on the environment. making cities in such a way that they don't have a negative effect on the environment. And the second big issue is making cities that are kind also on the people who are there. So it has a social dimension. Mayors, governors, and city leaders can actually do an enormous amount in a short period of time to make them environmentally and socially more sustainable. If you take this vast project happening here now in this city, London, at King's Cross, what is special is that they're actually trying to think long term over the next 20, 30, 40 years. The public sector has put in all the major infrastructure, so public transport, water, sewers, and all the things you need for that, and provided sort of the framework for sustainable development. And then the private sector has come in and made the investment that you actually need to provide jobs, housing, and also all the sort of the infrastructure of making people feel that they live in a place that they want to be at.
We've had a number of big initiatives that improved the city's smartness. One of them was Plan YC. We took a detailed look at what was going on in New York, what was going wrong in New York, and what the trends were over 20 years, and how, in a strategic way, we could affect those trends. New York City introduced more than 800,000 wireless water meters on every building around the city that has a connection to the water system. It sounds mundane, right? How you keep track of who's using how much water and how they're paying for it, but it's actually a very big deal. It lowers labor costs. People don't have to go onto your property to check how much water you've used. It makes the bills far more accurate, which means that the individuals have confidence that the government is not overcharging them. We've worked really hard to make sure that we have a state-of-the-art recycling system where garbage is separated, it's collected in a way that doesn't get it contaminated, and we've built recycling plants here in the city that create jobs and allow us to turn our waste resources into industrial products that are then going to be either exported or used within the city. A project like the High Line, for example, was truly transformative. The High Line was this abandoned elevated rail yard in an old warehouse district. And by turning it into this beautiful elevated park, we've actually changed that neighborhood's entire character. You can't be smart if you're only thinking about traffic or only thinking about economic growth. You have to think about multiple things at the same time.
नमस्कार और ब्लूमबर्ग फिलैंथ्रोपीज की तरफ से पहले इनोवेशन फ्राइडे में आपका स्वागत है. Welcome, my name is Parvati Menon. On behalf of Bloomberg Philanthropies, I'm happy to welcome you all to the first Innovation Friday session. It's really exciting to see that many people have joined in already. In fact, people started joining in about 15-20 minutes ago. Also exciting to see that questions are coming in, which makes it very easy for me to walk you through the tools that we have created for you in this very exciting new format. And I'm going to be your facilitator for today. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how this format of learning and technology works. And a very exciting session has been planned, and a speaker who's joining us from Europe for today's session as well. मैं थोड़ा हिंदी और थोड़े इंग्लिश में बात करूंगी ताकि हमारे सब पार्टिसिपेंट्स जो हमें ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं अलग अलग इंडिया के पार्ट से they will be able to join us and also pose questions as we go through this. ये जो फॉर्मेट हमने क्रिएट किया है, आप देखेंगे कि आपका जो स्क्रीन है जहाँ पर आप मुझे देख पा रहे हैं, where you are able to see me. Below that, you will find 4 very interesting features that have been created as a part of the Innovation Friday experience. The idea in this technology and using this technology is that you not only have an opportunity to hear the speaker on a very engaging and interesting topic that is relevant to your smart city, but you're also able to engage with them by asking questions, by participating in polls, also by keeping your Twitter feed very active. So जो नीचे 3-4 जो activities हमने आपके लिए create की हैं, सबसे पहला और सबसे इम्पॉर्टेंट उसमें एक्टिविटी है आस्क अ क्वेश्चन. आप उसमें अपना प्रश्न डाल सकते हैं. You can put your name and you can put in your question. The question feed comes to us as a series of questions that people are posing. We have a curator at our end who will look at the questions. A certain number of questions will be picked up at every session break point when we are taking in questions. And those questions we will pose to the speaker. We also have an option where you can add your phone number which, in your question. We will then be able to also call you back. We have a team that will work to first dial you out on the number. They will test if the line is clear, and then they will be able to connect us in so that you can then directly ask your question to our speaker. That's the ask a question. The next feature that is very interesting is a Twitter feed. You will find that the Twitter feed is actually linked to the hash Smart Cities Challenge, which is the hashtag that we are using on Twitter. If your team is tweeting as they are doing this entire process of learning, you will also see the Twitter feed pick that up. We have also created a poll. This poll is a quick method for us to be able to understand where you are, maybe get a sense of what you are taking away from these sessions, and an opportunity for us to gain some feedback and learning as well. When we are ready to ask a poll, I will give you a heads up. The section will also get highlighted. It will have a little boundary, maybe an orange color boundary around the poll. That is an opportunity for you to respond to a poll question. As soon as you submit your response, you will also see the pie chart or the graph that indicates what are people responding more towards, just as a feedback. That's the poll feature. Another very interesting feature that we've built into this tool, especially for the Innovation Fridays and for the leaders joining us from everywhere, is a download feature. You will see in the downloads that our speaker who's joining us today, his PowerPoint presentation is already made available as a downloadable link. So in case you want to download that and keep that available for you as a team, either for later reference, also for reference maybe perhaps as we are going through the session today for you to ask specific questions, it's a feature that allows you to do that. Those are the 4 primary features. My role today is largely to help you facilitate through the technology. अगर आपको कभी भी प्रश्न हो, उस प्रश्न को आप प्रश्न के बॉक्स में डालिए. पोल जब रेडी होगा तो मैं पोल हाईलाइट करूंगी, मैं बोलूंगी आप अभी पोल को रिस्पॉन्ड कर सकते हैं, ज़रूर रिस्पॉन्ड कीजिए. उसके अलावा ट्विटर फीड और डाउनलोड्स आपके लिए एक्सेसिबल हैं. I'm going to take not more any more time here, but be able to introduce the speaker for today, जो हमें आज join कर रहे हैं. World-renowned urbanist Pablo Vaggione is joining us from Europe. It's about noon his time. He's been very kind to join us on a WebEx, and we'll be able to bring him in. He is, he's a world-renowned urbanist, also the creator of UN Habitat's Urban Planning for City Leaders handbook, the guide. And today we're going to discuss how strategic planning is important in the context of smart city planning and how it has been integrated in many smart city plans. But before we do that, I'm going to request you to actually look at our first poll, which will come up very shortly on your screen. And we will also highlight that particular section so you're able to see where the poll is and be able to work with the poll. The poll that is coming up for you right now is: my city is going through a strategic planning process to help formulate its smart city proposal. Yes or no? You will see that your poll box is highlighted and the question has come up. It will give you a moment to be able to respond to the poll. Thank you very much for your response. We will also be able to track what the overall response was at the end of everybody having submitted their responses to the poll question. It is my pleasure and deep privilege to be able to introduce and bring to this particular forum today Mr. Pablo Vaggione, who's joining us specially for a session through WebEx. Welcome, Pablo. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Parvati, for that introduction. Real pleasure to be amongst this group that has such an important task ahead. The urbanization in India is a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon that, of course, will change the life of your descendants, but also very much the life of the rest of the world. I'm going to start my presentation, if I can. I'm going to be talking to you today about how can you use strategic spatial planning in defining the goals of your city. We have seen in the introduction video Mayor Peñalosa, the former mayor of Bogota, who had mentioned that it is really important for a city to dream, he said in his own words, meaning what is your vision, what is your direction, and strategic planning is precisely that. Let us go through the agenda of what we are going to talk about today. First of all, we start with a conceptual framework for what strategic planning is and what can it do for you. Then we're going to talk about two examples more in detail in the second part of the presentation. One is about Copenhagen and in Denmark, and the other one in Curitiba in Brazil. And lastly, we are going to recap in one slide, sharing why strategic planning is important for what you do. Please think of strategic planning as a toolkit to manage your city's future. As a city leader or a decision maker, there's a dual focus that you have to maintain on your work on a daily basis. The strategic perspective from 10,000 feet that gives you a panorama of the strengths and where your city is going, but also that needs to be supplemented at the same time with a view from street level. And that view, street level, is what gives you the tools to come up with action plans and action plans that lead to results. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you have a vision from 10,000 feet, but do not have a framework for action at the street level to produce tangible results, the vision from 10,000 feet is not really going to help you. And if you only have action plans or come up with projects at a street level, at a tangible level, you are missing a very important sense of a strategic direction that gives you that view from a helicopter that I'm referring to. What happens? Let's start with the worst case here. What happens if your city is not able to manage its own future? In that case, the planning profession, the planning system is largely irrelevant because it has been left behind, bypassed by the speed of urbanization. That usually results in quality of life being compromised, urban value not being captured, resources like land, energy, and water overconsumed, and all in all, the competitiveness of your city is a challenge. In many cases, city leaders, mayors, governors, of course, they try to minimize this shortcomings or externalities. But if you are not planning strategically ahead of you, you will be in reactive mode. And coming up with initiatives in reactive mode is helpful, but these are patches that do not tackle issues at their route. So that leads us to the thought that you need to prepare for growth with significant time ahead and do so with significant scale. The challenges of rapid urbanization is, and I'm sure you see this on a daily basis, how to deliver basic infrastructure with limited financial resources, how to deal with informal settlements, high land consumptions, how to deal with the environmental drawbacks of uncontrolled growth. There's a way to transform challenges into opportunities, the opportunities that urbanization brings. But for this, you will need to plan strategically to be able to link that 10,000 feet perspective, that is a vision of your city, to action, which is delivering tangible projects on the ground. You will need to create the conditions, and those are regulatory frameworks, incentives, so that others implement. And there was a reference in that video from the gentleman who was speaking about Plan NYC, about the project in London, in which the government created a framework, and then it was the private sector who came in with investment to deliver buildings, commercial buildings, residential buildings. And lastly, as a local leader, your city will need to demonstrate ability to enforce the plan. And there's a good way of showing that ability, which is by doing pilot projects that are linked to that vision. Right now, your city possibly looks like this. Thousands, hundreds of other cities in your country, in your region, in the whole world, trying to find a space, trying to find why they are different. They do things in a special way than others. So that sense of direction is coming up with a visioning exercise. And these are some of the questions that your city should be asking itself when coming to this vision exercise. Where are you now? What do you want to be in 20, 30 years? What makes your city special? How to make the most out of attributes. Every city has an attribute or more than one, and you need to make the most out of it. And the other side is how to minimize your weaknesses. What external conditions that we cannot control may influence our path to our desired state? What is the spatial strategy that will lead us to that desired direction? How much will it cost to implement and maintain, importantly? I cannot stress enough that it's not only about costing how much it is to build something, but to maintain it operative over the years. Who does what? This is extremely important to have a clear set of roles of all the stakeholders rowing together towards the same direction. But you need to know who is contributing with what into this journey, and of course, what adjustments you need to do to stay on track or to stay ahead of your competition. If I could give you 10 practical steps on how to take vision to implementation, this would be engage, lead, and facilitate a visioning process in which a broad range of stakeholders are part of. Then prepare a baseline of current conditions. This was also highlighted in the introductory video. We have seen how important it is to know where you are now, and that you can do by preparing a baseline of current conditions. Then conduct a strategic planning exercise to choose a preferred direction. Of course, there might be some options for you or your city development path, but it's always good to study all of them and then decide on which one is the one you're going to go with. And then you need to agree on strategic goals to be achieved every year. When we're talking about strategic planning and there's this horizon of 20, 30 years, this does not mean that we are going to be studying what to do for 20 years and then on the last year try to produce a result. But there are steps and phases and strategic goals that need to be achieved every year, as much as we do steps, and one step after the other take us to where we want to go. And develop indicators by which performance is to be measured, develop binding plans to materialize the vision, allocate resources through multi-annual budget, create conditions, again, regulatory and other conditions for implementability, and generate traction through pilot projects. One thought that I wanted to share, very important, planning is not an end in itself, is a means to a better city development. A plan that stays on the shelf, a plan that is not executed, is a waste of public resources. It signals inability to implement, it hampers credibility of the city administration, and it may damage its reputation. So very important, when we do planning, let's think of how to implement it from day one. Because planning is very much linked to bankability. Bankability means the ability of your city to mobilize resources. Cities need to be investable. You have to have a credible roadmap with vision, with action plan, and both of those with civic support. It's very important for cities to be investable, transparency, and an enabling business climate. Then plans need to deliver quality of life at the right price point. This means that of course, we can all dream that a city is a perfect place, but how much is that going to cost, and can we afford that? Jobs, services, open space, civic amenities are all part of planning, and importantly, as I say, cost of implementing the plan, what are the phases, what opportunities there are there for partnerships. In the end, a good plan can help reduce investment risk. And what investors look for when investing in infrastructure, in property development, is predictability, is stability, that they need to know that their investment will have a return. And this is strongly reinforced by the predictability of a plan, of a city that has a plan and can align projects with a long-term vision. One quick example here. In New York, 1811. We're talking about a city that was growing very rapidly, a city in an emerging market at that time, and a city that came up with a plan for expansion that was visionary at the time in 1811. Some of the reasons is that first, the size of a new area was 20 times larger than the existing city. The second was its design itself, which was tremendously innovative, with a rectangular grid that was conceived to accommodate future technology in public transport. Remember that the first passenger rail service was inaugurated in, I think it was 1848. So this plan, 30 years before, was already envisioning that one day rail cars will run through the cities. What I'm trying to say here is that this plan was extremely visionary, and the New York that we know today is because this plan was made the way it was back in 1811. And then an example of a visionary execution. A project in Barcelona, a district that was underutilized, industrial area that was underutilized, of a size of about 200 hectares. This was renovated, retrofitted with residential, economic activity, space, was the majority of it, 71%, and space for institutional facilities. What is important here is that the public sector, the government, came up with investment in innovative infrastructure with 192 million euros, but this mobilize 1.8 billion of private investment. Some of the infrastructure that was delivered for this district of 200 hectares includes centralized climate control, district heating, a pneumatic system of waste collection, and regulations that indicated that all hot water was to be delivered through solar thermal energy and electricity through photovoltaic, and also the installation of fiber optic telecommunication networks. I'm going to share a few slides about a practical way to think about how to manage spatial growth in a strategic manner. Of course, there are many factors you have to look at for this, but if you were to remember a few of them, I would think that the key factors would be to make sure that your planning regulations allow mixed use. Mixed use allows to avoid spatial mismatch between where jobs are and where residential spaces are. The second is the right density. Density has an implication on the cost of infrastructure and the cost of public transport. And third is balance the urban expansion with livability. And a city's livability is a factor of its public space and its natural areas. And this is not only for health reasons, for quality of life of the cities, but also cities with good public space are memorable cities. An example of a city in your neighboring country that shows how rapid uncontrolled growth in the periphery can be detrimental for a city's ability to deliver infrastructure. You see in red there how Lahore was in 1998. The next slide in blue, you see the growth that happened between 98 and 2014. This is a increase of a built-up area of about 3.55% per year. Now, what will happen if Lahore continues to grow at this low density in the next 30 years? Let's compare in the next slide Lahore with the footprint of other cities in the world. If Lahore were to grow at the low density that is currently growing in its outskirts, the footprint of Lahore would be as big as this. This is an illustrative simulation of Lahore footprint in 2030 at the current peri-urban density. What this means is that if your city grows at very low density, its footprint will be so big that it will be very difficult or very expensive to manage. Some of the implications of density and infrastructure provision. Less than 60 persons per hectare, the cost of capital cost is very high. Extreme high density, more than 800 persons per hectare. The cost is on maintenance. Some implications for mobility, less than 30 persons per hectare. Bus public transport is very expensive and will need lots of subsidies if you wanted to run. Less than 90 persons per hectare, the rail system is also not viable. If you have more than 100 persons per hectare, you are in a walkable environment. You have this presentation, you can download it, so you can look at these figures with more detail if you wish. Now I'm going to share three, in the last part of this, first part of the presentation, three possible examples of how can you attack the issue of strategic spatial growth. Three simple strategies: polycentrism, extension, and intensification. This does not mean that you have to choose one or the other, but most cities have to use a combination of them, depending the size, depending the speed of growth, depending the conditions in which they are. But just as to show, to define conceptually these three different options, I'm going to look at them separately. First one is polycentrism. This is a hypothetical city which has been growing over the years, mostly in the outskirts and through or on major roads. What will be a polycentric strategy for managed growth? First, identify settlements in the outskirts that can be consolidated into satellite cities. Second, establish strong public transport networks to those satellites. Third, establish transportation networks that link the satellites themselves. So going to the central city is not required. Satellites can have life on their own. An example of this strategy is the plan for Shanghai between 1999 and 2020. The plan was actually called One City, 9 Towns, and the 9 towns meant the 9 satellite settlements around it. One thing that must be pointed out is that not all the 9 towns have been extremely successful. Some of them they have, some of them have lagged behind. Those who have lagged behind are those who have the worst public transport connections with the core and the ones that have the least amount of jobs to offer within boundaries. A second option or a second approach to spatial growth is extension. Again, we have our hypothetical city, and you can calculate what are the land needs for the next 20 to 30 years, and then lay out a grid of streets. This does not mean that you have actually to build all the streets, but at least make a clear demarcation of where the rights of way will go, and then develop according to demand in phases. Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. An example for this was Barcelona, the plan of 1859, that also was significantly larger than the existing city. Of course, a plan to implement its political continuity to be materialized over the long term, and needs a strong understanding of how the land markets work to identify which development stages are the ones that are more likely to generate investment. A third option is intensification. This works by setting up a growth boundary which demarcates administratively where growth is going to happen, and allow growth within that boundary only, and of course designate reserve areas for when those areas within the boundary are dense enough to continue to expand. This is an approach used by cities that have slow population growth or areas that have low population growth, and where preserving the local character is the main driver. Of course, it maximizes the existing investment in infrastructure, and these cities act as service centers to rural productivity areas. An example is metropolitan Portland in the US, and you can see in the image below where a boundary between what is urbanized and what is not urbanized and is clearly demarcated. But of course, this requires significant enforcement and compliance with the plan. I'm going to stop here. I think Parvati mentioned that at this point there could be some questions, or of course, if you prefer, I can go to the example.
Thank you very much, Pablo. That was really very interesting. I think there are, also very useful for teams, smart city teams that are looking at area-based developments, and those inputs I'm sure will be very useful and valuable for him. for them. We have, of course, received a lot of questions, and I think this is a great point to take a few minutes of pause and perhaps take in a couple of questions. It will also give our audience a chance to be able to speak to you a little bit before we move on to the cases. And so I'm going to look at the first question that's actually come in. Which of the three strategies, polycentricism, extension, intensification, is best for your city, and why? What factors to consider when devising a plan or approach to your strategic plan and vision? What factors should a city be considering? That's the first question. Would you like me to pose one more question before you respond, Pablo? What's your preference?
Yes, please. If you could come up with two or three, that would be great.
Excellent. So the first question was around what factors to consider. The second question that's come up is, in our city, it's difficult to assess data because it doesn't exist in a way that's usable. How do we go about finding the right information and making planning decisions when data is limited? That's the second question. We'll take these two, and the third question is from Indore, and we will actually call in the participant for the third question, Pablo, after these two responses.
Okay.
Over to you.
Yeah, thanks. In the case of the factors to consider, which one of the spatial strategies is good for my city? First of all, I wanted to highlight that it's not one or the other. You might find cities that are doing the three strategies at the same time, because there are parts of their city that require one strategy and parts of the city that require another strategy. But in any case, factors in which you need to consider is the speed of the population growth. There's some strategies that are served better for faster growth than others. Second is the overall population size and area size of your city. Then its ability to implement a multi-annual budget, and the track record of implementability. Of course, there are some of these strategies that require, how can I say, more enforceability than others. So that will be factors to consider: speed of growth, population size, ability to implement in terms of financial resources, ability to mobilize financial resources. The second question is a very relevant question as well. What to do if I do not have data? And we are finding this in many cities that I have the chance to work all over the world, that you turn up to produce a plan, and basically nothing has been measured for years. You don't know how many people use cars, how many people use bicycles or bus to go to work. You don't know the value of land, how that has been transformed over the years, how land prices have increased. So basically, what this does is make city leaders feel like you're flying blind. Basically, you have no dashboard, no set of indicators to understand or to assess if it's better to go north or to go south. But having said that, having understood how difficult it is to come up with data, there are creative ways in which you can start to mobilize your community to measure things, to instill a sense of metrics are important. You can mobilize your local university, you can mobilize grassroots organization to understand issues in transport, to understand issues in access to water or to other services, one of the things that modern technology has brought to us is the ability to rely on citizens to provide their own data. I mean, with the widespread use of phones, of mobile phones, smartphones or not smartphones, that transforms every citizen into a possible source of data. So again, the conclusion be it's absolutely indispensable to have a baseline of data. If your city has not been able to do that up to this moment, there is a significant opportunity that the current leadership for the city starts with this process, starts with saying, okay, what we have now is a baseline, and let's see what the trends can be. And there are many creative ways using modern technology and using the civil society, universities, focus groups, NGOs to help you provide the basis of that baseline of data.
Thank you very much, Pablo. That was really helping to build on top of the topic, and I think the factors that you enumerated and sort of reiterated are very critical. You know, we were hoping to have you at the Ideas Camp, but I think through the Innovation Fridays, being able to have this deep conversation with you is enriching, and I'm sure that participants who've logged in will be feeling the same. Just to share with you that we have about a little bit more than 125 individual logins from different parts of the country, and in many places people have logged in and multiple people are sitting together. In Trichy, for example, we understand there are more than, I think, about close to about 50 people sitting together. Kankinad, about 20 people. Great to see that groups have come together for this learning. We have one more question lined up for this section before we move into the case studies, and that is the Commissioner of Indore. We would like to bring him on the phone line, and I think he's live now. Hi, I hope you're able to hear me. Thank you very much for posing your question and for joining us. Please go ahead and share your question. अपना प्रश्न share कीजिए हमारे speaker के साथ.
Can you suggest some innovative method for carrying out facade improvement in our retrofitting area, which basically is the central business district that is downtown of our city? And also if we can suggest some innovative mechanism for carrying out public consultation, especially in the commercial business district area of our city.
Thank you very much. Pablo, I'm not sure if you were able to get that. If you would like, I'm happy to maybe just sort of summarize the question for you, perhaps.
Let's see if I understand correctly. The Commissioner was referring to a retrofitting project in the central business district, and what strategies, innovative strategies to develop that, and especially with regards to public consultation. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. I'm going to mute first, so I cannot hear my echo. First of all, thank you so much, Commissioner, for your question, and I will take this moment to, in your name, thank to all the persons who have logged in. Parvati, you mentioned that groups are sitting around their computers to share this talk. It would have been fantastic to do this in person, but we have to thank technology and how Bloomberg Philanthropies has set this up, because I think it's a very innovative format, and the ability to reach out so many people at the same time is truly magnificent. Commissioner, you spoke about a project, area-based project, to retrofit the central business district. I would assume that what you're talking about is that there's an area of your city that needs improvement, and this coincides with a business district where there are significant amount of shops, commercial activity, going on. So public consultation is absolutely essential to gather energy, traction around your project. I'm going to give you an example of a project we did in Mozambique. This was a project funded by the World Bank, which was in the capital city of Maputo to retrofit the central business district. So very similar to what you're doing. And what we did is we developed a public consultation process whereby we went step by step with the community. We created a group of we call it a steering committee, in which all the stakeholders were represented, from the councilman for infrastructure to representatives of informal vendors. They're all represented in a group, and with them we develop a consultation process. I mean, the consultation process was not given to them tailor-made, but we said, look, let's work together first on how to come up with a consultation process. And that included visioning sessions together, that included choosing options together, that included coming up with the design of public spaces together. So at the end of the day, a plan like that has such tremendous ownership that you are transforming all of those who were involved in actually agents for implementation. This is extremely important, that your city, the people who are actually living or working or running their businesses in their district are 100% behind the plan, and they feel that is their plan, is their responsibility to implement. I think that would be my my advice for your project
On, please.
in retrofitting an area of a central business district.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Also, a big thanks to the Commissioner for asking a question, joining us online to do that. Pablo, thanks a lot, for being able to give such a detailed, in-depth response to that. I just want to take a quick time check. We are about, we started about 10 minutes late, so 20 minutes more. And I know that you have two very interesting cases to share with us. So perhaps I will request you to, get into the cases, and then we could do another round of Q&A. There are a lot more questions that have been lined up.
Okay, two examples that hopefully illustrate what we have been discussed. Copenhagen in Denmark and Curitiba in Brazil. Let's start with the case of Copenhagen and some of the things that made this, the planning thinking that has made this city one of the most livable in the world. Think of post-World War II, 1947. Tremendous population growth going into the cities after the war, and that created a pattern of sprawling growth with very low density, not a compact city, quite the contrary. So the local government, supported by the citizens, came up with a very, very simple spatial idea. They call it the finger plan. And you can see in the image how the palm of the hand will be the consolidated city, and how the expansion would be through axis in which most of the population would live. What is important about this such simple form? It was a vision that was created through a participatory process, and it was a vision, a spatial vision that was very easily communicated to both politicians and citizens. So it's very easy to remember how is our city growing. Our city is growing through our finger plan. What is important also that it linked transport and land use planning at metropolitan scale, and it was consistently implemented over decades. We're talking that the 1947 plan was recognizable in the 2007 and 2013 finger plan. The next slide shows us the plan 60 years later, and you can still recognize the axis of development where transport lines go. This is the precursor to transit-oriented development that is some of the ideas behind a smart city. And in this rail corridors towards the villages in the periphery reveal wedges with green areas, with natural landscape in between those fingers. There's communities that were planned for around 10,000 inhabitants, around shops, schools built around stations, and this system has been largely successful in absorbing population increase. And let's look at the finger plan, how it was conceived in 1947, and how Copenhagen is today. You have the palm with the central city still the largest, and then you have communities that have grown over the axis, over the fingers. Those are axes with public transport, rail in this case, and you see how natural areas are in between the fingers. So conclusion for this, very, very simple ideas that have a strong public ownership are very helpful to implement spatial strategies. Then Curitiba in Brazil, a city that has gone through significant rural migration pressures. The population doubled in the 10 years between the 50s and 60s, and then doubled again in the 1970s due to industrialization. Again, sprawling development in the periphery, and the lack of a systematized, of an organized mass transport system made commutes very expensive and very long. The 1966 master plan of Curitiba, and you're starting to get an idea of yes, strategic planning takes a long time to materialize, but at one point the new city needs to start, and this is an excellent moment to do so when India is undergoing this tremendous urbanization trend. So what Curitiba came up with in this case is that along the transport corridor, and you can see in this red line here, the master plan was able to transform spontaneous growth that was going into any direction, into planned growth through distinct axes. Where commercial and residential development would be allocated. The municipality was able to acquire land and reserve right-of-ways and came up with a system of parallel roads and block apart and central lanes for public transport. The mayor of Bogota, Enrique Peñalosa, in the introductory video, he made a reference to BRT, the bus rapid transit. And it was actually in Curitiba, the pioneer city of BRT in 1974. You know that BRT has a dedicated line, large capacity buses of board payment, and stations that expedite and bus entry and exit. But what is important for a BRT project is that it's not about the buses and the infrastructure of the roads only. It's also about what do we do with the space that is next to this axis where the buses run. And in the case of Curitiba, what they did is they increased the floor area ratio, which is called FAR. This is what is used by cities to determine how much you can build on every plot of land. So the FAR along the axis was increased to 6:1. Then the FAR decreased as you go away from the axis where public transport is. In a section, this looks something like this. Around where the buses are, you can have more density, and if you have more density, you have more uses of the public transport system, and then the density decreases as you go further from this BRT axis. Again, a concept of continuity was critical here. The 1966 plan was consistently implemented over several local government administrations, and some of the outcomes are truly remarkable. About 70% of commuters use public transport daily. Curitiba grew from 360,000 to 1.8 million and has been able to manage and minimize congestion in the central area whilst controlling the sprawling development in the periphery. And very importantly, amongst all of this population increase, it has been able to improve the quality of life tremendously. Think of this. In 1970, there was less than 1 square meter of green space per person. After the implementation of the corridors with green areas also where buses run, there are 52 square meters of green space per person. That is a tremendous success and a tremendous improvement in terms of quality of life.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to go through.
I'm sorry, I thought we could take a few questions.
Would you like me to finalize with my concluding remarks?
Well, no, I thought we could take a quick pause, Pablo, because there are a few questions that are coming up. And perhaps we could take a few of questions, and then in your concluding remarks, it would be great if you could, of course, summarize for us some of the key learnings and also reiterate those along with the kind of questions that have come in, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So I'm going to, you know that the lines are very active in terms of questions. I'm actually going to take a question that has been tweeted into the session. The Faridabad team is tweeting, and the question that they are asking, which is very interesting, is will the formation of smart cities and the development of these smart cities cause property prices to rise unnaturally in adjoining areas? It's a huge challenge as cities grow and the urban areas grow. Your quick thoughts on that?
So the question is how to deal with land property increase.
Yes.
Land property in smart cities, yeah. Well, of course, if you improve the infrastructure, if you improve services, the value of land in a market situation that will increase. What cities can do is control or rather create the conditions whereby some of this additional value that has been created by the infrastructure, by public investment, is recaptured back to the city. And with that, the city has additional funds to invest in infrastructure in areas where it was lagging behind in terms of access to services, in terms of access to infrastructure. But also through planning in advance, you as a city leader or as a technical decision maker in your city can be able to pre-assign areas where land can be more affordable and where land can be, of course, in that case, allocated to affordable housing. And this is all a trade-off with the market. Example, especially in Latin American countries, where areas designated for affordable housing provide bonuses for developers to develop market housing elsewhere. So what I'm trying to say is that the investment in infrastructure, that developing a smart city, that needs to be recaptured by the public sector in one way or another, and through planning, the public sector can create the conditions whereby there is both market and both affordable residential and commercial development.
Thank you. Just moving on to our second question over here that we have. This question has come in from the team in Madhya Pradesh. What spatial strategy would work better for cities in the state of Madhya Pradesh, one of the large central states in India? For Madhya Pradesh, which are generally low density in terms of population and development and have better land availability for expansion, what would you recommend? That's one question. I will perhaps share one more question, Pablo, for your thoughts and inputs. The second question is from the Smart City team of Mangalore. The strategy for developing a Tier 2 city should be development of economic growth centers along with the city level infrastructure. What are your thoughts and opinions on that? I'll just repeat that second one. The strategy for developing a Tier 2 city should be development of economic growth centers along with city level infrastructure. What are your thoughts on that? So 2 questions before we get to a phone question.
Thank you very much. I have to put a big disclaimer here first, because my understanding of the particular conditions of your cities in India are not to the depth that I want them to be to come up with intelligent comments. So I'm going to provide more general answers in hope that you can find some sort of a reflection to your particular case. I'm going to start with the second one, which is mentioned economic growth and city level infrastructure. One of the key failures of planning, if I can speak this way, is that spatial planning has been separated from economic development planning in many occasions. And in that case, you see a territorial strategy going in one direction and an economic development strategy going in a different direction. Integrating both economic growth and spatial development is absolutely indispensable for a smart city. So if you were to, in your municipal government, I'm not going to say merge 2 functional areas, but really ensure that they coordinate, I would make sure that the functional area of economic development and the functional area of city planning work together hand in hand, possibly even share the same space. Because it is necessary for a city to exist to create jobs. If the city has no jobs, it ceases to be a city. So economic growth, planning for economic growth, absolutely indispensable. And of course, city infrastructure has also to be seen in a way that facilitates economic development. So that they're all very, very much tied up. And for the case of this city that has this concern, my recommendation would be try to think of economic development and spatial planning as one indivisible discipline. Second question about what to do. Our city has low density and there's lots of land available for development. And it's always easier for property developers to build low density. Why is this? Because it's cheaper, because it's faster, and the margins are higher. But where's the other side? The other side of developing low density. Developing a city in low density means that there are significantly higher costs in infrastructure, in taking the mains to a longer distance, in coming up with public transport, coming up with the services, the security, schools. So in a way, what this does is that the general public is subsidizing the development in low density. So there's, when we're saying low density or high density, it doesn't not mean that we are proposing people to live in very tall buildings with small houses and they all feel like overcrowded. There are cities, examples of cities that have an extremely pleasant environment with densities that are extremely viable. I mentioned the case of Barcelona. You can think of nice areas in European cities. Densities are 300, 400 persons per hectare. There's no need to be afraid of spatial density. In the case of how to prevent developers from actually promoting sprawl or for inducing sprawl, is there's incentives that can be set for developers to build in consolidated areas and retrofit and coming up with using spaces that are within the consolidated city that are underutilized. So those incentives can go from taxes to increase FAR or the buildability of the plot. And in a way, again, what the plan does for you is that the plan creates incentives of where development, where you want development to happen, and disincentives where you don't want development to happen.
That's a very valid point, and I think relevant for a lot of cities in India that are rapidly growing. Their peripheral areas are growing as well, and that creates huge challenges in being able to maintain overall property prices. Pablo, of course, we are running short of time, but there is a great many number of questions that have come in. So I'm just going to take two more questions. One of them will be a caller, and I will just share with you a Twitter message as well. I also want to share with all our participants that given limited time, we will only be able to take in a few questions, but your questions are going to stay with us, and we are going to make sure that if possible, we're going to share those with Pablo over emails, try and get responses, and you will see updates on our blogs as well as in our follow-up newsletters. So do keep your questions coming. Please don't get disheartened if they're not picked up. The idea is to make sure we are able to respond to them. So one quick Twitter input that's been received, I think building on the same issue of finances, but from a different perspective. The smart city of Bareilly has sent in a thought via Twitter saying smart city proposals are very challenging for those cities which are facing issues of revenue generation. How do you sort of find ways to generate revenue for what you need to develop and be able to put that hand in hand? Some thoughts on that. But in addition to that, I think we are also going to bring in Mr. Gaurav Singhania from Bhopal with his question, who's I think now online with us. Hello, Mr. Singhania. Thank you very much for joining us in this session. And I know that you have a question. आपके पास एक प्रश्न है Pablo जी के लिए. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I have two submissions to ask for. Basically, first question is, how do we prioritize our vision for our city when our city has resources and our city is resourceful in multiple sectors? Like for say, if we are resourceful in say education, health, then we have industries, and how do we prioritize our vision for our city when we have multiple resources? First is this, and my second question was, later in the planning process, like after 15-20 days, how do we move forward to prioritize our pan city solution? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pablo, were you able to get that question?
Yes, I think so. Prioritization of and how to bring together a different range of stakeholders. Of course, this is an extremely relevant question because, as you mentioned, there are a number of different agendas that the city has. The city has to provide education, the city has to provide health, the city has to provide public space, a number of things that the city needs to provide for to be a city, to be a smart city. So coming up with a vision is doing so with all of these stakeholders together. If you have a committee that is mandated to develop the vision, it will have there someone who can speak for education, he someone who can speak for health, and through able facilitation, the visioning process will be co-owned, co-designed by all of these different sectors, functional areas, and also areas for that will need investment. So, first of all, the vision has to, from its inception, make sure that all of these different sectors are brought together in an integrated manner, and then prioritize what to do first. Of course, you can do cost-benefit analysis. What is our lowest hanging fruit, and what are the projects that will take more time to implement. One resourceful strategy that many cities have implemented is to do a few demonstration projects that help anchor the vision. And those are demonstration projects that can be done in rather quickly, 2 or 3 years, but they're clearly linked to the longer term version, and they are clearly explained to the community that they are the start of something bigger that the next generations will see. The first question about smart cities are excellent, yes, but how do we generate the revenue to actually implement the project and to generate the infrastructure basis that the project requires. You may recall the project we mentioned in Barcelona, where the multiplier between public and private investment was about, I think, 1 to 10. So for every euro invested by the public resources, there was the ability to generate 10 from private resources. That was really linked to the slide I mentioned on bankability. How, if you have a credible plan, then your city will be much more attractive to investors. And creating for example, a public-private company specifically mandated with the implementation of the project has been a resource that has been used in many cities that needed to go through complex regeneration processes. In any case, again, thinking that your city can come up with a plan and then put it in front of the private sector to see if the private sector will invest or not is actually making a gamble. Why not from day one have conversations with private sector, with investors, and see how they can be part of the project, how they can help also make contributions towards paying for the infrastructure. But for this, again, you need a solid planning framework and identifying very clearly what are the specific projects that you want to push forward, specific demonstration projects that you want to put forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Like I shared, a lot of questions still, but we are already 15 minutes over time. So I'm going to request you to share, your concluding remarks in case you have any concluding slides as well. And then we will go into a quick poll and an opportunity to get some feedback from our very engaged participants.
Okay, thank you. My last slide. I hope this helps you to summarize some of the things that we've been sharing. There's one common element into any thriving city in the world, is that they do have a vision and they do have an action plan for growth. Anticipating is much more cost effective than reacting. If you invest money, your municipal budget in patchwork to put short-term remedies, at the end of the day will be much more expensive than an anticipatory strategy. Long-term planning is not only about having a vision for 20, 30 years, but to be but to provide a roadmap on how to make an impact step by step. We know that a planned urban form can make a difference in quality of life, and a city with a good quality of life attracts the type of talent that you want your city to attract in order for it to be called one of the smart cities. We know that planning has a positive impact on the urban economy. A city that is well planned, that functions well, has more chances of being economically active than a city that is chaotic. When your city has a plan and is able to speak with neighboring municipalities and create clusters of decision making at a regional scale, that starts to provide you an opportunity to attain efficiencies of scale when delivering services like water, like energy. Very importantly, the continuity of a plan. That a plan needs to be implemented over time, and if there's continuity of political support, this generates credibility in the plan, and credibility generates interest and confidence from investors. And finally, if you have a strategic plan, that provides consistency to messages. Remember the case of Copenhagen. One of the key lessons learned from that case is that the spatial plan in itself became the message of the city. And 50 years later, that is consistently ranked as #1 city with the highest quality of life in the world, still calls back and says, look at this, we achieved this because in 1947 we together came up with the decision of coming up with this finger plan, and we have been implementing it for over the years. So again, last thought, vision and action plan are the common traits of thriving cities. Credibility and consistency to messages are supported by the ability to come up with a vision and an action plan.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Really appreciate the time that you've taken. Sorry that we went a little over time, and really look forward to more responses to the questions that we've received. I'm going to try and wrap the session up now. As we shared earlier, the PowerPoint is already available for download, and the video that we've been through right now, the live stream has also been recorded, so that will also be available online shortly. You'll be able to access all of that through the Smart Cities Challenge website. Newsletters will contain more updates as well. You will see that the poll section on your screen has been highlighted. It would be great if you can share a quick response to the question there. Was this valuable, and were you able to take value from it? I will also request that we get a quick little bit of feedback in the question section where you've been typing your questions. Give us one key takeaway or learning that you believe yourself, or if you're sitting with a group of people, your team has taken away today. Just leave a few words for us there in terms of one key takeaway that's been important and relevant for you today, that will help you and that you think you can implement in your smart city proposal. We'll request you to respond to that question in the question box, and also respond to the poll, which is throwing up a question right now for you, that requests you to pick one of the 4 options. While our city teams are implementing or working on the poll and the question, I would like to once again thank Mr. Pablo Vaggione for joining us and for giving us such an enriched and engaged session. Thank you very much, and we look forward to engaging again soon. Thank you, Pablo.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For the cities who have now been able to respond to the poll, please note that this is, like we had shared also at the Ideas Camp. The Ideas Camp was the beginning of the learning process. Today has been the first of the several Innovation Fridays and Practitioner Connects that have been designed specifically for all the teams, consultants that are all working together on their smart city proposals. The next session is scheduled on the 6th of November, which is next week, Friday, and we look forward to meeting you again then. अगले हफ्ते फ्राइडे 6 नवंबर को हम फिर मिलेंगे. इसी तरीके का एक प्रोग्राम होगा जिसमें हमारे कुछ स्पीकर्स आएंगे, कौन है वो स्पीकर्स, उसके बारे में चर्चा होगी आपके न्यूज़लेटर में, तो न्यूज़लेटर देखना ना भूलिएगा. Don't forget to watch out for the newsletter which will give you an information on who the speaker for next week will be. इस बार 128 logins हुए और बहुत शहरों में बहुत लोग साथ में बैठे. Many people sat together in many of these login points, and we hope to see more and more team members join in from your end and from each city. Thank you very much. We really hope that you've put in a poll input as well as given us a little feedback on what is the one key item you've taken away that you can implement in your smart city proposal in the question section. Thank you from all of us and the team at Bloomberg Philanthropies on behalf of the MOUD. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the 6th.